What is going on, you ladies and gentlemen? Today we're going to talk about Ubisoft and their continuation as a company. Now, unfortunately, I have to give you quite a bit of context, otherwise you won't really understand my point or the points I'm trying to make about them as a company. But I took the time, I spent a few hundred hours going through their financials as well as a few different source points just to make sure that I had the correct information. Alrighty, so now as of the 27th of March, there's actually been a massive update with this. Ubisoft actually created a subsidiary company that essentially will own 3 of their major IPs, Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege, Assassin's Creed, as well as Far Cry. Now, this company was valuated at $4 billion, whereas the original company of Ubisoft is only valued at about $1.5 billion. What essentially ended up happening was that Ubisoft, by the end of 2025, will be assigning these 3 IPs to their subsidiary companies. So think something of the lines of Meta and Instagram. Instagram's a private company owned by Meta. However, it's still the same company, if that makes sense. Now, however, Tencent actually bought 25% of this new company for $1.1 billion, making them a 25% stake shareholder in it, and Ubisoft owns the other 75%. Now, some of these specifics and the nitty-gritty of the transactions that we know so far are actually that the entire transaction, so the subsidiary and everything being assigned to the subsidiary company, will be completed by the end of 2025. The new subsidiary team will have its own dedicated leadership team supervised by the board of directors of Ubisoft, and it will be focused on enhancing creative vision and streamlining operations with the authority to make swift, high-impact decisions across development, marketing, and distribution to ensure these brands continue to evolve, attract attention, and deliver groundbreaking gaming experiences for years to come. Now, what this means is that Ubisoft will still be directing these games and these IPs. However, Tencent, it will actually be a minority stakeholder in this new company and will have rights of its own with those IPs. So they will have some say in the development of these new companies, but we don't yet know the entire details of the agreement. Now, it is a 5-year lockup on this new private company, meaning that Tencent could not acquire more of this subsidiary company unless Ubisoft loses its majority standing. So if they are ever in massive financial trouble, so for example, if these next 2 or 3 games don't do very well again, and they are going to essentially close down or they need extra funding, then Tencent actually has the first come first serve to buy more shares of it and then essentially become the major stockholder in it. Either way, they could technically become the major stockholder in this new subsidiary company by 2030. So potentially in the next 5 years, Ubisoft will no longer be a Ubisoft by Ubisoft company, it will be a Ubisoft by Tencent company. Now next, let's get into why Ubisoft even needed to make this deal in the first place financially. Why would they essentially give their entire company over to a Chinese company? Well, let's get into that here. Before we get started on this, I know everyone's already going to ask, ooh, what's your stance on Assassin's Creed Shadows? It's alright. It's hype, okay? The game is above average. What do you consider a good game then if it's only a meh game? Well, I honestly consider the 5 pieces of Exodia, okay? Graphics, optimization, combat, story, dialogue. Wait a second, wait. If 3 of these are in, it's a good game. If 4 are in, great game. Wait, sorry, not that one. 5 are in, master tier game.
That's why he's the GOAT!
Now that we're done with that, let's talk about Ubisoft and their ability or inability to stay in business and keeping their IPs or what's going to happen with that. So we're going to start from a more financial side, and I'm going to keep this as simple as possible, as things can get complicated pretty quickly. Now, why? Why does Ubisoft need a whole investigation? Why does it need a review and analysis to figure out what's wrong with the company when from the outside it's pretty evident? Now, to give you a little bit more transparency, I took time and summarized some of their financial statements from their investor reports as well as investor calls over the last 5 years. And when we finish this, we're going to look at the stock price and different things that could have influenced the stock price to crash.
1, 2, 3.
Now, if we're looking at this from left to right on the header, you're going to see year fiscal year, revenue in the millions of euros, expenses, millions of euros, operating income, and net income. Now, you can see here there is a pretty big fluctuation. They're either at a loss or barely positive and at a massive loss. And if you look here, they have an enormous amount of expenses. Now, I was trying to figure out why exactly they would have this sheer number of expenses. And I figured out that in 2022 to 23, they had 20,000 employees. And I did the math, and if you average in about 70,000 euros a year to each person, that's about $1.4 to $1.5 billion a year just in payroll. Now, to give you some comparisons to go, oh, hey, well, I don't really have any reference points because you probably don't. I went ahead and made the same grid for Blizzard pre-acquisition. You can see their income is relatively stable. Their expenses are pretty relatively stable. However, they're not really overlapping or intertwining at all. Their operating income is just ever increasing, and their overall income was ever increasing. Now, yes, you could argue that they were preparing for an acquisition, so they wanted their finances to look as great as possible. Additionally, Blizzard had about 10,000 employees at the time. Bandai Namco, okay, making about 2.3 to 5 billion a year. Their expenses a little bit higher than Blizzard. Their operating income still really good, still well in the green, and their net income also still well in the green. They have 7,500 employees. Next, let's look at Square Enix. 1.7 to 2.2 billion average on their revenue. Their expenses nowhere near the line. Their operating income is there. Their net income is there. And Square Enix has 4,000 employees in the main office. And I wasn't able to figure out exactly how many employees were in subsidiary offices because I know that figure only represents the main offices and the main programmers. So just keep that in mind. So if you look here, you'll notice a common pattern. Every other company, even though they're making more money than Ubisoft, is spending much, much less. What ended up happening, from the best that I could see, is they were consistently hiring about 1,000 people a year, starting in about 2016, and then all of a sudden, Assassin's Creed Odyssey does really, really well. Now, I'm assuming, there's no thing that I could find on this, however, I'm assuming they went, oh wow, we did really, really good, let's do like Call of Duty does, where we will have one team do one Call of Duty and another team do another Call of Duty, and they'll just alternate that way. They didn't really hire too much in 2020 because obviously COVID just started then, but in 2021, they saw the massive gaming boom, so they started onloading a bunch of people again.
Hello?
You hear about the job?
Yeah, thanks, I was just...
However, hiring 5,000 people in 1 year is insane. I looked it up. I couldn't find exactly how many people they had in HR, but there were about 1,400 people throughout all of their offices that are like administrative personnel. So like they don't do programming or coding or anything like that. They're just like on the business and handling side of things. And percentage wise, just from averages that I've seen, that's about 100 to 200 HR staff. So you only have about 70 to 140 of those people actually doing hiring. So each one of those people that year made many, many hires. And I bet you they did not do an amazing job of actually going through the hiring process and making sure that they hired the correct person, and it wasn't a DEI hire or just a rush hire. Then the catastrophe struck in 2022 to 2023. So they went ahead and started downsizing, and they've been downsizing ever since this point. So they peaked at around 20,600 people, and they've been trying to let more and more people go. Now that we've talked at their financial numbers, let's talk about the elephant in the room.
Look at this graph!
Why is their stock the way that it is? Why does it look like it fell off a cliff in a Looney Tunes show? And how does that actually affect Ubisoft? So for complete simplicity's sake, a company's stock is what the next person is willing to pay for it. So let's say Joe had a stock of $100 and he wants to sell it for $100. But me, I think it's worth more. So I'll buy it from Joe for $100. And I think it should be worth $110. So now I'm gonna wait until the price gets to $110 before I go ahead and sell it. Now, what happens when this stock that I want to sell for $110 isn't $110 in actuality of what everyone else thinks it is? Well, let's say that in actuality, this stock is worth $60 in everyone else's minds. Well, then I have to sell it at $60 or hold it until it comes back up to 110. That's really the simplicity, right? Now, when you're talking about a company's stock, the internal value and monetary flow doesn't come from their stock. Just a stock value represents like the market's interest in the company, and it's generally a byproduct of how good or bad the financials are in a company and their future potential profitability, and it's also easier to borrow against as a company. Here's everything that happened to the company in the last 5 years. So March 24th, 2020, they came out with Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Breakpoint DLC. Then June 25th, 2020, there was misconduct sexual allegations in the French newspaper. The Libertarian reported that allegations of toxic workplace culture, including SH and bullying. Ubisoft launched internal investigations with external consultants promising disciplinary action. Then afterwards, key executives left, so you had the chief creative officer, VP of the editorial and creative services was also let go. Then they made a Trackmania remake July 1st, 2020. Hyperscape opened up in an open beta in the beginning of July, and it full released in August of 2020. Honestly, I've never even heard of this game. And, well, that kind of makes sense because the service for it shut down on the 20th of April, 2022. Then Watch Dogs Allegiance came out in October 20. Assassin's Creed Valhalla, November in 2020. Immortals Phoenix Rising in December of 2020. Then we had the Riders Republic, also never heard of it, in 2021. Then Just Dance 2022 came out in November of 21. Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Extraction shooter game came out in January of 22. Roller Champions came out in May of 22. Then they did a collab with Nintendo this year, Mario and Rabbids Sparks of Hope in October of 22. Then in January of 2023, they came out and said that they are going to go ahead and cancel 3 projects on top of the 4 that were canceled in 2022, and that Skull and Bones was delayed again, and that caused the price of the stock to drop significantly. Then they came out with a game called New Settlers Allies in February of 23, and then during their fiscal year reporting in May of 2023, they recorded a loss of 500 million euros. Then right after that, Assassin's Creed Mirage came out in October of 23. At this point, they are starting to implement a cost reduction program. Now, the issue with cost reduction in Europe specifically is that you have to offer generally severance packages, so they can't just go ahead and lay off 500,000 people, unfortunately, for them. So in October of 23, they started to go ahead and cut costs. So they got rid of about 1,000 people by this point. Then in December of 23, Avatar Frontiers of Pandora came out. Pretty much a ghost town with that, not really much happened. Then Prince of Persia The Lost Crown came out, which was a side-scroller, and it was really a mixed audience in that. People kind of liked the combat from what I could see. It didn't really sell too much, and it got a lot of backlash because it was a full $60 price. It was pretty much a basic side-scroller for $60, which a lot of people felt was kind of a ripoff. So that pretty much also failed to land as well. Then right after that, in February of 24, Skull and Bones came out. This game cost them $650 million in development, and it didn't really sell too much. It was pretty much publicly ridiculed from what I could see. Not really the best of choices to have made after spending almost $1 billion in a game. Then May 24, The Division Heartland was actually canceled. It was Ubisoft free-to-play spin-off game of The Division. Then in May of 24, X-Defiant came out, and that was a free shooter game. However, it relied mainly on skins and different in-game purchases, and that pretty much fell on deaf ears from what I could see. And a few months just after that, they announced that the servers will be shut down in June of 2025. And then Star Wars Outlaws came out on August 30th, and that also completely fell flat on its face. In September 24, the CEO launched an investigation and hired outside contractors to come in and do an actual investigation and analysis of the company. as well as announcing that Assassin's Creed was delayed from November of 24 to February of 2025. It then later was finalized for March 20th of 2025. And let's not forget that on the 20th of March 2025, it was the 30-year commemoration of a massive tragedy that happened in Tokyo in Japan. There was actually a gas attack in the subway, and it's still considered one of the most brutal attacks of the day in Japan. September was actually a 10-year low at 9 euros a share. However, just a week later, the stock spiked 30% to about 13 euros and 50 cents amid rumors that Tencent was apparently looking to purchase more of the company. Because if you don't already know, Tencent already owns about 9% of Ubisoft. Then 2 days after that, there was actually a lawsuit started on the 6th of October 2024, where Ubisoft actually faces a lawsuit because it alleges that Ubisoft Store and Ubisoft Plus user data were actually shared with Meta and Facebook without any prior consent forms being signed. So that is still ongoing from what I could see. Then in November of 24, Assassin's Creed Shadow controversy escalated over a bunch of cultural inaccuracies, such as Yasuke being a protagonist and having been a samurai, as well as the broken Torii Gate resembling Nagasaki's World War II damage, and various other inconsistencies with reality. Then in December, XDefiant announced its servers to be shut down in June of next year, as well as laying off another 300 people. February, Ubisoft's revenue fell 31.4% from the year before to about $1 billion for the past 9 months, which is a pretty significant deal because if you look at their last year's income, it was actually at 2.3 billion and they were only at 990 until that point. Now, obviously, they count everything going into Q2. So, for example, their fiscal year actually ends the 31st of March. However, they don't report on it until May. So they pretty much have 2 months to fully figure out their finances, as well as to figure out how to report or to solve something if it is a massive catastrophe. Then, unfortunately, the 3 former executives that, if you do or don't remember, from the trial in 2020 were actually started to go on trial in Paris over the SH allegations. And as part of that, in the second hearing, they requested the CEO and the head of HR to also testify and to go to court. And then finally, Assassin's Creed Shadows launched on March 20th of 2025, and it has been a bit of a weird start, to be honest with you. It hasn't been terrible for them, it hasn't been amazing for them, but there's been a hell of a lot of people talking about them. So now you have the big picture on what's happening. Now, there is one other thing I would like to mention here, which is, as you may or may not know, pretty much all large corporations and businesses acquire massive loans at a really cheap rate. I'm talking like 0.5 or 1%. For like 500 million to $1 billion, which they then have to pay back, obviously, with the fruit of labor of that company. Now, this is much cheaper generally for a company to do than for them to just pay for it themselves. And obviously, once a company like this has that much debt, there's really only 2 things that you can do with it. One, you refinance it and you restructure it, hopefully to same, similar, or better terms. Or 2, you pay it off. Now, what happens when you have too much debt compared to what your income is and your reserves? Now, what happens when you're stock traders and you have bad publicity around your company? Well, then it becomes very hard to refinance it with another institution, or you get really bad rates, which in turn then makes it even harder to pay it off in the future because obviously your monthly payments will be even higher. So that's pretty much the wall that Ubisoft is running into now. So they're getting close to the point where no banks and institutions are willing to lend them. Now, obviously, this would have been a much, much simpler video if Assassin's Creed had just up and failed, because at that point, they would have essentially had to declare bankruptcy, just because they don't have enough money to cover all of their expenses and their debts, just straight debts, right? Like, how much debt does Ubisoft actually have? Well, they have about $700 million due within the next 12 months. And their non-current liabilities, which are beyond 12 months, is about 2.23 billion currently. So Ubisoft has a cash reserve of about 933 million, with receivables, so that's invoices that they're owed to the tune of about 615 million. So they're still about $1.5 billion short on how much money they need to come up with for the debt. Now, if you're thinking, oh, well, maybe it's totally fine and, it's probably comparable for the industry. And now just to give you a few comparables on how much debt other companies own that are around the same size as them. So Blizzard pre-merger had about $1.2 billion in current liabilities and about $400 million in non-current liabilities, so over 12 months. And obviously all these numbers I converted to the euro just so that way there's just an exact one-to-one. Bandai Namco, the current liabilities were about 1.5 billion and their non-current were about 381 million. Square Enix had about 650 million and their non-current was 163 million. Now, having had the deal from Tencent go through today was the biggest windfall possible for Ubisoft, because this actually allows them to operate without having any worries about anything for at least another 12 months, give or take, if they make no other income besides that. So yeah, they were in a bit of a pickle. They would have had to figure out how to refinance, get new institutions, grab their current debt, restructure it, get their old debt, whatever. All that complicated stuff. They don't really have to do it anymore, okay? However, now their butt is on the fire because they really got to make sure that their next games do start producing profit, so they don't get bought out. And that's pretty much what they're trying to avoid at this point. Well, now let's talk about their pipeline and their company going forward. Now, obviously, yes, they have a few games that they announced over the past few years. And just to kind of bring it in here, all of the games are going to be Annos 117, Pax Romana, like an RTS city building game, probably going to do terribly because we no longer play games like this, really. Sorry, guys. Then you have Assassin's Creed Codename Jade. This is the game that they actually wanted to make when Assassin's Creed Shadows came out. It's a mobile ancient China Assassin's Creed. Then you have Tom Clancy's The Division Resurgence, so it's basically another gaming game on your phone. And then we got Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time remake. They restarted on the project in 2023 with a ballpark window to come out in 2026. Then we have Assassin's Creed Codename Hex, which is probably my most worrisome game for them. It is a Assassin's Creed game that you play as a little girl in the witch trials in Salem, and you apparently can control things with your mind and whatnot. I will have a separate video on that, just to kind of get more in depth with that, because if they're really going to go through what I think they're going to go through, that's actually going to cause the company to go under and be fully bought out by China. Then we have Beyond Good and Evil. This was hinted out in 2008, and then they announced it in 2017, and we haven't really heard much about that since then. Then we have Project U. There's been one closed beta test. We don't really know anything about it. All they said was that it's a new concept of a session-based co-op shooter where players unite to prevail against an overwhelming threat. So we'll kind of see what happens with that. Then we have the Splinter Cell remake. They announced it that was going into development in 2021, and it's been 5 years, and we have no release date or possible release date. Then there's Tom Clancy's The Division 3. We have no idea what's going to happen with that. It says that apparently we'll get an update on that in mid-2025, but we'll see. And that's everything they have. So if you think about this, their subsidiary company will not have this game. It will have this game. It will have this game. It won't have this game. It will have this game. Won't have this game. Won't have this game. Won't have this game. Will have this game. So over 50% of the games here, and probably 90% of the big name games. Prince of Persia is the only really big name game that isn't going to be released for the company, as Ubisoft itself. It'll be under their subsidiary, which doesn't have a name yet. So hopefully we'll find more about that in May. All right, so to wrap this up, just so you don't get 20 minutes of just pure facts with no conclusion, Ubisoft has got to make the next game or two amazing. No bullshit, no controversy, no DEI, no anything. Just make a good game that people go, wow, they've changed, and then they can start to shed off the fact that everyone hates them. That's kind of the issue they're running into now. On top of that, they need to fire another like 4,000 to 5,000 people off the new team that's going into into Assassin's Creed and into the Division and Far Cry. You need to really lean up, get your expenses down, so you can start actually having more liquidity to do things with, and not to be so stretched and to have your back to the freaking bar all the time. You know what I mean? Like, you're like at the edge of the Titanic, and like you're just sitting right there on the edge as it's sinking. Like, okay, well, now you got a little dinghy, so let's not put a hole through it with this harpoon, yeah? And that's pretty much all they have to do. If they do their jobs well, and we'll all win. Okay, I just want good games. You just want good games. They want to make good games because then they make money, and investors want them to make good games because then they make money, and then the investors get back more profit. Everybody wins. Also, there's no layoffs. You know what I mean? Please, Ubisoft, just do that. Okay. That's all we got for today. I hope this clarified things. I hope you feel enlightened. If you liked the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe. If you want to see more, you know, if you have any questions, leave a comment. If you want to leave a comment anyways, go ahead and leave one. Thanks so much for tuning in. Peace out for now.